This forum is co-hosted by the Palestine-Israel Ecumenical Network and Free Palestine Melbourne in partnership with Palestinian Christians in Australia and Sabeel Australia, and is funded by a grant from the federal government's Community and Social Cohesion Support Program. My name is Michael Sheikh. I am employed as a project officer for the Palestine-Israel Ecumenical Network, or PIEN. PIEN is a network of Australian Christians and supporters who seek justice and a lasting peace for all the people of the Holy Land. It was established in 2006 and has grown to be a national movement comprising different denominations of the Christian Church in Australia. Its niche within the Palestinian advocacy movement is to engage Christians around the reality of the Holy Land. It does this through showing solidarity with Palestinian Christians in particular and amplifying the voices of Palestinians and Israelis who seek a just peace. 2, through advocacy by engaging with politicians, writing articles for church media, and speaking out to the church, and speaking out to church leaders and challenging biblical narratives and an apathy to engage. Finally, it does this through raising awareness by giving presentations to churches and other organisations presenting facts and issues within the recent history and the current situation in Palestine and Israel. Producing resources for churches, particularly around holy times of the year, and regularly hosting speaker tours. If you'd like to know more, there is a PIEN table in the foyer and a sign-up sheet to receive the PIEN e-newsletter. Well, that's all from me on the subject of PIEN, but at the conclusion of this panel discussion, May Safe will close the forum on behalf of Free Palestine Melbourne. Okay, I would like to just begin this forum by introducing our first panelist, Susan Wahab. Susan is a co-founder and president of Palestinian Christians in Australia. She was born in Jerusalem to an Arab Orthodox Christian family after the 1967 Israeli occupation of the Palestinian territories. She grew up in Ramallah before migrating with her family to Australia in the 1980s. Susan's maternal and paternal grandparents are refugees who lost their homes, businesses, and their land in Jaffa and Ramla following the 1948 Palestinian Nakba, or catastrophe. Susan believes that we are all God's chosen people and that we deserve to live in peace and dignity. Welcome to Melbourne, Susan.
Thank you. Good evening, everybody, and thank you for hosting us here in Melbourne. We just landed this afternoon, and we love Sydney. We love Melbourne. And talking about love, actually, I love Palestine. I love my holy land, and I love everybody in it. And I wish that one day everybody will love each other too. Tonight I want to talk to you about my story, and I want to share with you two amazing women. Sorry, I always cry every time I talk about my grandmothers. This is Teta Widad, and this is Teta Labibe. Teta Widad came from Ramle, and Teta Labibe came from Jaffa. And both of them, with their families, their children, most of their extended families, they lost their homes, their land, their businesses in 1948, and they were forcibly driven out of their homes And I grew up with their stories. All I remember with both my grandmothers, every time they told us the stories, you know, all the grandkids, even though they told the story non-stop every time we go and see them, because the trauma is there, they never stopped crying. So it's like the more they told the story, the more they cried. And you know, when somebody loses their home, it's traumatic. And they lost their home, and it was not their fault. They were not going out there to kill anybody or want to drive anybody away. But they were victims of an empire that wanted to create different Middle East. And so I carry the trauma that they experienced in 48, and we are now 2024. When the war in Gaza happened, and we saw how people were being bombed, and one suburb after suburb was being told, you know, you need to leave. That was a traumatic experience for our community here in Australia, the Palestinian community in Australia, because it reminded us that this is the same thing that happened to our grandparents. Even though my family settled after 1948 and were driven from Ramle and Jaffa in Ramallah, the occupation followed. You know, the 1967 occupation followed, and I was born under occupation. And looking back at the stories of what happened to our family, my cousins get beaten up, they get imprisoned, they get tortured. By 1985, after my parents saw my cousin get beaten up, taken for 18 days, and nobody knew where he was, my parents decided that the best thing they can do for myself and my siblings is to leave, because they didn't want that to happen to my brother and my sisters and myself. Because at any moment in time, the Israeli army will knock on the door and take the kids away. So we ended up in Australia. And I thought Australia was, you know, for the people who were white, because when we went to Tel Aviv to the Australian embassy, they were all white English-speaking people. And when we came to Australia, I actually thought, this is Australia, it's white people. But then we discovered that Australia actually was full of Aboriginal people. It was not white Australia, it was blackfella country. And then I realized that the Aboriginal people were exactly the same as us, the Palestinians. But the first day I went to school in Australia, somebody asked me, where are you from? And I said, Palestine. And the teacher heard me and she said, no, it's Israel. And I had an argument with her that, no, I just came from Palestine, and it's from Ramallah, and I'm from Ramallah, and Ramallah is Palestine. And that was my first experience when she said to me, if you want to live in Australia, you'd better not say Palestine. And that became, and it wasn't the first and last experience. I had so many people correct me that there is no such thing as Palestine. And they were mostly, to be honest, Anglo-Australians. The only people who accepted that I come from Palestine were actually Jewish. And I met, you know, I worked for a Jewish firm, and they accepted me as a Palestinian, which is very ironic, isn't it? But it's because, you know, the Anglo-Australians were being brainwashed over the years, but now they're waking up. The other experience I had was as a Christian. A lot of people, when I say I'm from Palestine, they think I'm Muslim. And when I say I'm Christian, the first question that I was asked by the school Christian teacher was, "Oh, when did you convert?" And actually I was shocked. I was like, "Oh, I didn't convert. I mean, I was born like that. We are all Christian. We've been Christian for a long time." It took me a long time to start, I would rehearse what I would say to people if they ask me, "Where are you from?" From Palestine. And if I'm, when I tell them I'm Christian, I would rehearse what I would have to tell them, because everybody took me by surprise. "You don't know anything about Palestine. You don't know about that. Christianity started in Palestine. Jesus Christ was from Palestine." So then I started saying to people, there is Palestine. Look up 1948. Up until 1948, it was Palestine, and there were people there, and they looked like me. And by the way, when people ask me about my Christianity, I say, whether I converted recently, I would say, listen, my ancestors 2,000 years ago converted your ancestors in Europe. So I'm proud of my heritage. I'm proud of who I am and where I come from. And most people would say, "Oh, you're Roman or the Crusaders," and I say, no, we're a mixture of the first Jewish community that converted. Well, they did not convert; they just believed in Jesus Christ. There were Jews who believed in Jesus Christ. The labels were changed centuries later with the Roman, Constantine and the spread of Christianity, and it being a religion that was approved by the Roman Empire. In Australia now, the reason we want to share our Palestinian heritage and also our Christian heritage, and that's the reason why we've set up this organization called Palestinian Christians in Australia, because we want to tell the world that we exist. And I'll share with you about who we are, where we come from, and our connection with our Muslim and Jewish brothers and sisters in Palestine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Susan. Our next panelist is Nachshon Amir. Nachshon was born and raised in Israel in a religious Zionist community. He served as a combat officer in the Israeli Defense Force during the First Intifada, and yet he has been an active member of Free Palestine Melbourne for the past 4 years. Thank you, Nachshon. Welcome.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you, Michael, for your kind introduction, and good evening to everyone here. As Michael said, I grew up in Israel, in a religious family, Zionist family, and like every child in Israel, I learned from infancy that this is our land, and there's other people here, Arabs, we didn't call them Palestinians by then, that they hate us, they don't want us here, and we have to defend ourselves from them. I think in my childhood it was more fear from the surrounding countries like Syria, Egypt, and Jordan that didn't have this peace agreement with Israel by then. And there was Arabs in Israel, Palestinians, but we didn't even, in the day-to-day life, we didn't even meet them, except for when they came as builders or very low wages laborers. So other than that, we didn't have any engagement with them. So they were only in the, I would say, the fringes of our consciousness. There was no issue, no problems at all. And that was my reality. That's what your parents told you and the whole society tell you. So this is reality for me. That's how children are. If the story is of the wolf in the forest, this is the bad animal. That's what children are. And naturally, I wanted to serve in the army because the army is the holy cow in Israel. So to be combat in the army is more than to be an AFL player. So, and I was very idealistic, Zionist, and I knew that if I could do it, I would be an officer in a combat unit, and that's exactly what happened. I joined the army, I served all the places. I served in Lebanon, I served in the Golan Heights, I've been to Gaza. Quite a long, not like in the West Bank. I served in the West Bank a long time, and this is the 80s, late second half of the 80s, so it's the second Intifada mainly, and that's what I did. And during the day, I just humiliated or made people's lives horrible, the checkpoints or in the streets, and during the night, I just terrified children and mothers in the houses in some invented missions. But that was the aim, to just keep them on their knees so they will not even think about rising up and fight for their freedom. So I was the same person like today, but for me the reality was that they are the bad guys and we are the good guys. So I had no choice to do it, I just follow orders. 5 years in the army, more than I had to do, because I was an officer, so it's a volunteer thing. So that's how I worked. So practically I oppressed Palestinians, and I was part of the apartheid regime at that time. I just didn't know that this is the reality. It took a few decades on to have, I don't know how, or it's a different story from tonight, to have cracks in my consciousness and doubt all the reality I've told and all the history I've been told. And yeah, and I learned the real reality, the real history, the real reality of now. Again, it took a long time, but I learned it. And I learned that what really happened is like similar places around the world, like the US, like Canada, like Australia. People from Europe came to Palestine and wanted this land, and it calls settler colonialism, and exactly like in all these places, as Susan said, it ended up in ethnic cleansing and cruel ethnic cleansing of the land. So my grandparents came from Eastern Europe, half of them Poland, half of them Lithuania, in the early last century, and they escaped from real anti-Semitism and real persecution. So they ran out because of real reason. But they didn't come to Palestine, the Zionists didn't come to Palestine to be part of the land with the people. Like a lot of Jews moved from Eastern Europe to the US or to Britain or even to Argentina. But they didn't come to Chicago and say, we go to Judah, Chicago, just share, be part of this land. But in Palestine, they wanted the land to themselves on the expense of the people, and this is the reality of that. And they talked about it way before it happened, because it was under the control of the Ottoman Empire and then the British. But or before the last British soldier left Palestine, the ethnic cleansing started, and what the Palestinians called the Nakba, and during that time, about 85% of the Palestinians were expelled from the country, from their houses. Hundreds of villages were destroyed, ruined to dust, so they will not have any place to come back. And Israel, the new Israel, stole all this land to their own use. And immediately apartheid regime was forced on the land, and that's the reality in different way till this day. So the reality is keep going. And what we see now in Gaza is just another cool chapter of the same thing that been through all these decades. Nothing new. Well, for me, look, I'm going to talk about the reality that I see and what can happen. So in between the river and the sea, there's roughly half Zionists, half Palestinians. Palestinians can be Christian, Muslims, Druze, and others. No one's going anywhere. We have this lunatic in the White House now, so I hope I'm right. But Palestinians are there to stay. And eventually, sooner or later, this land will include all these people, and they all deserve to live in dignity and have full rights. And eventually, what's going to happen. Now, the issue is that never in history, I think, a supreme group gave up its privileges or advantage that they got from their supremacy. So I don't expect, and I know my people there, they will not give up. I mean, the white people in South Africa, like in South Africa, it will never happen without an external pressure on Israel. And this is what we should all aim and be part of. This is for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nakshon. The next panelist is a very good friend of mine. He didn't provide me with a bio, but I will say that of all the people I know in Australia, nobody is more knowledgeable about Palestinians, Palestine and Palestinian culture than he is. This is what I got off the internet. Yusuf is the founder of Aspire, a not-for-profit organisation that provides legal and language support for stateless Palestinians fleeing conflict-based zones like Iraq and Syria, and has contributed to the resettlement of more than 250 Palestinians to Australia so far. Since 2013, Yusuf has been the director of the Averroes Centre of Arab Culture. In recognition of his work to promote awareness of the culture of the Arab world and its groups, Yusuf was awarded the Eureka Australian Medal in 2017 and was named the Palestinian of the Year in 2021 by the Lady of the Earth Foundation in Palestine. Please welcome Yusuf Al-Ahmad.
Pressure. Music is easier. Who owns the Holy Land? Who owns the Holy Land are those who are holy. In other words, those who hear the divine whisper of the wind through the olive trees. Those who can sense the grace of Allah and God in the scent of apricot blossoms in springs, and those who are utterly transformed by the divine gift of love. However, of course, this is difficult because history weighs heavy on the minds and hearts of those who inhabit the Holy Land. This is not going to be a timeline of events in Palestine, nor it will be a brief history of Palestine, but some snippets of history that we can draw lessons from. 4,500 years ago, the Yebusians, al-Yebusiyun, an offshoot from the Semitic Canaanite Arabs, came to lower Levantine, Palestine, in big numbers and inhabited it. The Canaanites, al-Kan'aniyun, they built towns, villages, cities, including Yebus or Salem, the old name of Al-Quds. Like the Pharaohs, the Persians, and the nations of Mesopotamia, the Canaanites contributed to the advancement of the world civilization, especially in agriculture, alphabets, and theology. They traded in a currency called shekel. 1 shekel would equal 22 grams of sha'ir, barley. Jerusalem was around 7 centuries old when Prophet Abraham, the father of the 3 monotheist religions, came to it. He was welcomed by Melchizedek, the Arab king of the city, who was a monotheist himself. The king protected Abraham, gave him bread and wine, and gave him his blessings. 9 centuries later, the King David defeated Goliath and established for the first time the first kingdom for the Hebrews in parts of Palestine. Centuries later, after the land had seen newcomers and rulers like the Greeks, the Babylonians, and the Persians, finally the Romans, and not knowing anything about the miraculous birth that split history, Holy Quran tells us this about Virgin Mary. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. فأجاءها المخاض إلى جذع النخلة قالت يا ليتني مت قبل هذا وكنت نسيا منسيا. And the pain of childbirth drove her to the trunk of a palm tree. She said, "Oh, I wish I had died before this, and I wish I was in oblivion, forgotten." Holy Quran. And at the beginning of the 4th century AD, the reins of power went from the Romans to the Byzantines. This ended in 637 when Umar ibn al-Khattab, the second Khalifa in Islam, entered Al-Quds, the city from which Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, was ascended to heaven and the arrival of Umar was at the invitation of the inhabitants of Al-Quds. No blood was spilled. The terms of the surrender of the city were concluded with the Christian patriarch Sophronius. A year later, Umar lifted the ban on Jews living in Jerusalem. There was a ban on Jews living in Jerusalem imposed by the Byzantines. And Umar lifted the ban a year later after the Arab conquest and the Muslim conquest of the city. In 1099, the European Crusaders captured Jerusalem. The fall of Jerusalem was followed the next day by a massacre of the entire city population. 50 to 75,000 Palestinian Jerusalemites, Christians and Jews were slaughtered and were set to fire. William Asuri, one of the historians. And the question is today inevitable? Is what we are seeing, is the violence inevitable? Is the conflict inevitable? Is the genocide inevitable? And the answer is no. let me pose a hypothetical question. Hypothetical question. What would happen had the European Jewish migrants who came to Palestine followed the suit of either the Circassians or the Armenians? Now I want to quickly give you a brief journey of two groups of people that were not from Palestine, nor they were from the Arab world, who came to the region from Europe. The Circassians, we call them in Arabic Sharkas. The first documented genocide in contemporary history happened against them. From 1763 to 1864, a century of violence against the Muslim Circassians of Central Asia, today's Chechnya, today's Ingushetia, today's Dagestan, Turkmenistan, and parts of Central Asia, which resulted in the expulsion and killing of 1.5 million Circassians at the hands of the Russian Tsar. And of course, they were driven out of their homeland in Central Asia through today's Ottoman Empire, which is mainly some Arab countries. And when they arrived, they assimilated. They were given protection by the local Arabs. They lived in peace. They were able to keep their language, to keep their culture. If you don't believe me, Google the bodyguards of the King of Jordan and see what comes up. The bodyguards of King Hussein and his father, King Talal, and his father, King Abdullah, and his son, King Abdullah II, are still allowed to dress. The bodyguards of the monarch are dressed in Circassian outfit in honor of this group of people that came to Jordan in early 20th century. And they live, and there is also in Jordan a Jil club. You know, can watch them and see how beautiful, how diverse, how rich their culture is, especially the dancing of the Central Asia. And if you think they were able to assimilate because they were Muslims like the majority of the locals, think of the Armenians. The Armenians also came to Palestine, to Lebanon, to Syria, to Iraq, to Egypt after the Armenian genocide of 1915, and they came in relatively big numbers. They were Christians, unlike the majority of the locals, but they were given protection. And they are not less of Palestinians than us. They are not less of Syrians than us. They kept their religion, they kept their culture, they kept their language. In my music band, Tara Ensemble, that's another way of promoting my concept. Excuse me. Excuse my shameless self-promotion. In my music band, we have two amazing musicians, Syrians of Armenian background, Grigor and Hajak. They came from Aleppo, came from Damascus, but they are still Armenian, and they brought so much beauty. And in the Camp David negotiations, the Armenian quarter came between Yasser Arafat and Ehud Barak and Bill Clinton. You know, Armenian families, most of their family name end with Yan. Qadarian, Hachikian, Kardashian, the wrong example. I'm just giving it. So the Armenian quarter came up in the context of the Clinton parameter said what's Jewish goes to Israel in Jerusalem, what's Arab goes to the Palestinian state. And then Israel said the Armenian quarter is not Arab and it should not go to the Palestinian state. We will take it. And then Yasser Arafat said, excuse me with his broken English, excuse me, Mr. President, you don't know my real name? And he said, what is your real name, Chairman Arafat? And he said, my name is Yasser Arafatian. That he is not less of Armenian than the Armenians of Jerusalem who came to Palestine recently. Point is, had the Jews come to Palestine seeking protection from one of the earliest chapters of history, which is the pogroms of East Europe, and later the Holocaust, we would have given them protection, and Palestine would have been more beautiful, more diverse. They would have brought to Palestine the advancement in medicine, in science, in law, and they would have made us much better. But instead, Zionism chose Jewish supremacy and chose violence. And we have now a century-long record. And I will end with the same quote of Mary the Virgin. in the context of the current genocide against us. One of my friends, a Bahraini journalist, wrote in his on his Facebook, "يا ليتني مت قبل هذا." I wish I had died before this. And one of my other Iraqi friends, he called me the news of the uprooting of the Palestinians, again the genocide and the transfer of Palestinians, and said the same, "يا ليتني مت قبل هذا," quoting Virgin Mary. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Can you hear me? Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Yusuf. And like I said, he's one of the most knowledgeable person I know in Australia about Palestine. For those of you who are interested, he's doing a course of lectures on Sunday afternoons called Understanding Palestine. If you want to know more, you can look it up on the internet, or you can ask anyone in Free Palestine Melbourne and we'll give you the details. I've been to a couple, they're brilliant. Okay, now I'm just going to ask the panelists a couple of questions and then I'm going to throw it open to the floor. The first one is for you, Susan. I'd like you to tell us more about the Palestinian Christian community today, and I'm particularly interested on the impact of the Gaza genocide, particularly on the community in Gaza.
The Palestinian Christian community is not alien to the Palestinian population. We are part of the Palestinian, like all the Palestinians, whether they're Muslim, Druze, or Jews. We come from the same land. The Palestinian Christians could trace their heritage whether to the early Jews who adopted Christianity, whether they were Romans who were living in the land and became Christian, whether they were Greek, also the Ghassanid tribes who came from Yemen. Also we trace our heritage from them, especially people from Bethlehem, Beit Sahur, Beit Jala. So we're basically a multicultural society. When I did my DNA, it was a mixture. So I'm like, what do they call those people that are, mixed? There's a name for that.
Beautiful.
Hybrid. So I'm like 60% Syrian Lebanese, 20% Greek, 11% Ashkenazi Jew. I don't know which great-grandmother did some naughty stuff. And 8% Armenian. So, and I know some Palestinian Christians who are like 40%. They trace their heritage to Jewish DNA. But also some of them also trace their heritage to the Crusaders as well. So we're a mixture. We are part of the Palestinian, the whole Palestinian population. In 1922, when the British did the census in Palestine, we were 10% of the population. About 13% of the Palestinian Christians at the time were outside of Palestine, because apparently there was a famine back then, back in 1920s, and a lot of Palestinians left and went to the Americas, mainly the Americas, Central and South America and North America, of course. And that's why there are lots of Palestinian Christians that come from Bethlehem, Beit Jala, Beit Sahur, who live in Chile. So there's about 350,000 Palestinians who have got, have come from those three towns. And in Chile, they say that 1 out of 10 Chileans trace their heritage to being Palestinian. When the British did the census in 1922, they basically stopped anybody who was outside of Palestine to come back in. So
a lot of Palestinians who were in Chile, Peru, in these countries, lost their residency to come back to us, to Palestine. And that's the reason why, you know, they've, within overnight, the British made sure that 13% of Palestinian Christians no longer can come back to Palestine. So for the past 100 years, our numbers have dwindled. And so we went from 10% to 1% in Gaza, 2%, 2.5% in the West Bank. There are Palestinian Christians also in Israel. I think they're about 250,000. I don't know what the percentage is, but they're related to me. You know, like they're my cousins. So I've got cousins on both sides who have got Palestinian passport, and cousins on the other side who have got Israeli passport. It's just because it happened that some people ended up staying and some people ended up being driven out of their homes in 48. When the war in October 23 happened, there was a small Christian community in Gaza. There's 2 churches in the middle of Gaza City, and a lot of the Christians basically ended up in the 2 churches, hiding in the 2 churches in the first couple of weeks of the war, because the Israelis bombed the Christian suburb, which is Al-Rimal in Gaza, which has got lots of Christians in there. They started with Al-Rimal. So the Christians ended up in the church, and lo and behold, they still are in the church. However, half of them have actually been trickling out. The last families that ended up leaving was May 2004. That's when the Israelis took over the Rafah border and locked anybody coming out. We've welcomed about 350 Palestinian Christians here in Australia, mainly in Sydney, a few families in Melbourne, Adelaide and Perth. And it's been devastating for the community because, as you can imagine, these people have been living, you know, on mattresses in the church, eating canned food, have not eaten fruits and vegetables for the past 16 months. They've lost all their homes. They went through the war. They heard the screaming. We were watching the videos of what was happening to them around the church. People came out and looked around, and they saw everything destroyed in front of them. And a lot of the families that have come here, they said, I didn't believe it when people were saying everything is bombed. And one lady said, I only decided to come to Australia when I looked around and I saw everything destroyed, and I looked at my 3 kids and I thought, I can't have them live in this situation. Most of the people that have come here came on visitor visas. I think by divine intervention, we set up our organization 3 years ago to advocate for Palestinian cause and to advocate for Palestinian Christians, and also to counter Christian Zionism that is sweeping the world. But our organization became a charity overnight, and we basically raised money through churches, Christian institutions. We raised over $500,000, basically knocked on doors, sent emails out to every single church across Australia. And some of the priests told their bishops, you need to do something about the Palestinian Christians. And the money poured in, and we helped 60 Christian families to be housed, furnish their homes, pay their rents. And also we've helped 29 Muslim families as well to support them with their rental payments as well. And it's been devastating because now half of the community is gone. A lot of families don't know what they're going to do, what's going to happen to them. And the people who have left as well and ended up in Australia, to lose everything and to think I have to start all over again, you're actually torn between forging a way forward in a new country, you know, getting a job, buying a house, getting a loan, you know, becoming part of Australian society, but at the same time you're also being pulled back to the memories, to your home, to what you've left behind, who you left behind, and also, you know, longing for your homeland, because that doesn't go, you know, doesn't go away. I've been here since '86, and for me, when I think about home, I think about Ramallah. So Palestine is within us, and yeah, the Palestinian Christians do not want to leave their homeland, and if they have left, it's because they have been forced to make really hard decisions.
Thank you very much, Susan. My next question is for Nakshan. According to a recent poll by the Jewish People Policy Institute, 80% of Jewish Israelis support the expulsion of all Palestinians from Gaza. In your experience, is there any hope that these people will ever be able to live in peace and equality with the Palestinians?
That's not the question I told you to ask. Yeah. Look, I tend not to be optimistic. It's not that I want not to be optimistic, but this is these were my thoughts up until a year ago, when I met I'm thinking probably now, we had a little forum of Jewish people, anti-Zionist Jewish people, for just recorded, and there was the one lady there, which is way older than me, and she grew up in South Africa, and she said to me, because the last question was, what's your hope? And she said to all of us, she grew up in South Africa as a not human rights, but she was very left-wing Jewish family, and they fought the apartheid in the 70s as Jewish people. By the way, there were a lot of Jewish in this movement. And she said, if you talk about ending the apartheid in the 70s in South Africa, everybody will laugh for both sides, because the hatred was so deep and so much, and I think it was way longer than the Zionism over the last 100 years in Palestine. And she said, well, and it ended up with the apartheid ended, and this, I mean, I'm not saying it's the best relationship, but it ended, and it's now a democratic state with equal rights to everyone. So, yeah, but I would think that my people in Israel, a lot of my even friends, and let alone people far away from me, they can never live with Palestinians, and the same the other way. I mean, if I was a Palestinian, I would hate. I mean, the child that I was in his house in the middle of the night and yelled at my mom in front of him, he hates me for a reason, because this is not only experience that he went through. He saw his cousin get shot in the eye, lost his eye, and another friend died. So I created Hamas. There was no Hamas when I was in the army. Okay? It's the first intifada, there was no Hamas at all. What I did created Hamas. So that was the level of the hate. And why would this child not come to Tel Aviv and explode into he has no hope? But still, if we learn from South Africa, which is a similar situation for me in Palestine, it has ended and it's different now. So if you ask about this 80% of people in Israel, They will not decide it by themselves, but if they will be forced to end up the Jewish supremacy regime that is the apartheid Israel, they will tell the stories later on, and they will recover from this addiction or this cult of supremacy, and they will live together with the Palestinians. Peace. I hope I answered the question that I wasn't ready for.
You did well. Yusuf, would you agree with Nachshon's characterization? You said a beautiful thing about that if the Jews had come as peaceful immigrants, you would have welcomed them and they would have added to the tapestry of Palestine. Do you think that's still possible after the appalling violence? And I'd like you to talk somewhat about the issues of identity in this conflict, please. And then I'll throw it open to the floor.
If you ask me about the shift within the world Jewry in general, then there is hope. So one of the points of strategic threat to the Zionist ideology is the shift within Australian Jews, American Jews, European Jews. It used to be automatic. You are a Jew in New York and therefore you are Zionist. And now it's no longer the case, especially among young generations. And that is worrying the creators of that Jewish supremacy. That is worrying the Zionists in general. The shift where it's no longer automatic, where I question the moral issue of Israel, where it is against the morality of my own religion. Even if you are not a practicing religious person of Jewish faith, it is against the morality of your human nature. So if in the context of the international Jewish movement, I would say, yes, there is hope. We in Australia see this, and the evidence is this. Now we share a stage with Nachshon, and I came to be aware that also Nachshon's daughter are in occupied Palestine, playing an important role supporting the Palestinian struggle for freedom. And therefore, yes, but inside Israel, I do not think there is hope. Because it seems to be that Israel is heading towards more right-wing, more fascism, more religious Zionism, more fanatic fascism, and I don't know if there is any within forces that will stop that. So that's to answer your question. Now the issue of identity. The word identity in the Arabic context is problematic by definition. What is the Arabic word for identity? Anyone else? Yes, huwiya. Now, unlike English, where identity happens to start with I, which is first person pronoun, in a reflection of the individualistic nature of this word, could be a mere coincidence, but it happens to start with I, where you say ID and I am. It is in line with that. The translators of the word identity into Arabic went to third person pronoun, huwa. What does that tell you? So your identity in the Arab world, in the Arabic context, is shaped by social acceptance, more than how you define yourself. In a way, huwa is good, he is bad, he is tall, he is short, he is Palestinian, he is an Arab, or she, third person, how you are seen by the others. So it is problematic by definition, to start with. I learned this also from, if you allow me to give reflections of my upbringing. I was born in 1974. I was a holiday baby in Jordan, but my parents were in Saudi Arabia, so I decided to ruin their holiday. But I grew up in Saudi Arabia. So by the time I made it to year one, it was clear to me that I am Palestinian. Palestine was very present at home, in the stories, in the posters, in the cars, so the music in the car, Palestine, Palestine, Palestine. It was not overdone, but Palestine was strong it had a strong presence in my upbringing. So I went to school expecting that my classmates, the public sphere, will see me as Palestinian, but they didn't. They saw me as ajnabi, Arabic word for foreigner. In Saudi Arabia, growing up in Saudi Arabia, in Kuwait, in the Gulf, then there is one basket for locals, for nationals, and there's another basket for non-Saudis, and you are a foreigner. Now, it's not like there is anti-foreigner sentiment, but there is different. It's a different way of being seen. And of course, I am a person who holds Jordanian passport. So by the time I went to Jordan to do university, I wasn't seen as also a Jordanian by the public, even though that I'm a citizen of Jordan. But I was more seen as a Palestinian activist because of my father's revolutionary profile and us being, the upbringing in PLO youth camps. So I was seen as a Palestinian in Jordan, as an ajnabi in Saudi Arabia, and then when I moved to Australia in 2003, I'm still the same guy, I'm still the same Palestinian, but how did Australia see me in 2003? What do you think? As a Muslim. So I'm seen as a Muslim here, not in the most Muslim city, most Muslim country, which is Saudi Arabia. Isn't that fascinating? Why? Because Australia decided to see migrants from, especially migrants from the Middle East and North Africa, from sectarian lenses, and not just Muslims. I am seen as a Sunni, and not just Sunni, as moderate Sunni, and not just moderate Sunni, as you could go further in the way the state sees you, because there is Salafi, there is Tablighi, there is Wahhabi, there is Shi'i, there is political Islam, and you can go further and further in sub-categorizing the subcategory. And the point is that when it comes to identity, the Palestinian national identity, like the Iraqi and the Syrian and Lebanese and other Arab national identity, is Arab. But Arab is inclusive, where the point of reference is Islam. The point of reference is Islam. So that's why it is inclusive to the extent that Christian revolutionaries joined the movement, and they didn't feel less Palestinians. Like George Habash, the founder of Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, Christian Palestinian, like Naif Hawatmeh, Christian Jordanian, not even Palestinian, a Jordanian who is the Secretary General of the Democratic Front for the Liberation of Palestine, DFLP. And of course, I don't want to mention the big name of Edward Said and many other big names and I will give one person from a civil society, which is Khalil Sakakini. Khalil Sakakini, the education in Palestine is no longer the same before and after him. So the Christians of the Arab world are the spearhead of the Nahda. And I always give the Butros al-Bustani, the Lebanese Christian in the 19th century, who decided to update the 8th century old dictionary. Up until the 19th century, Lisan al-Arab and al-Muhit and Arab dictionaries were 8 centuries outdated. And then came Butros al-Bustani, this Christian Lebanese, and decided to spearhead a movement that resulted in what we call today modern standard Arabic, and gave this on a silver platter to the Muslims and fellow Christians and all the Arabs. And now we can teach Arabic language at Deakin University and at Melbourne University with so much ease, thanks to people like Butros al-Bustani. So when it comes to the national identity, there has been some talks about, whether or not the conflict is a conflict of religion, conflict of ethnicity, conflict. Look, the Palestinian cause is like a sea where the main river can be religion, but it's not the only river, and it's not the prime river. I would say the Palestinian conflict and the cause should evolve around human rights issues and the Arabhood of the holders of the cause, but not in a nationalistic point of view, in its inclusive form. In a way that with Susan and my other fellow Christian Arabs, what does that mean? Like, this is like, say peace be upon Prophet Muhammad, meaning like absorb your anger, mention the Prophet. She will say Salah ala Nabi ya Zalami, and she will say Wahad Allah ya Zalami. Are Islamic words, because even the Christian of the Arab world are of pan-Arab national identity where the point of reference is Islam. Sorry for the long answer.
Thank you very much, Yusuf. Look, I now want to throw it open to the floor. We've got a roving mic. I'll just ask anyone who asks a question, please make it a question. We've got a unique panel here, so I want to share their wisdom about. So try and keep it short. No autobiographies or manifestos, please. Please, pick your hand up. Let me give you a question. Please.
Thank you. My question to you, Nahshon, I'm just curious about what made you change and what awakened this consciousness in you. Thank you.
I knew. Does it work? Yeah. I knew this question will come, and the answer is not very interesting. Because it's hard for me to put a finger on it. I mean, so there's thousands like me in Israel that became anti-Zionist. It's still a tiny minority. It will not grow that much anyway. So some of them have a more dramatic story about some occasion that made them shift to the other side. For me, just very long journey. I remember, I can tell a few milestones on the way, but it's not, it was never in some unconscious. So one thing I remember, so when I was a child, I told you I was very Zionist religious family, so this kind of mob, that these are the people that went first to settle the West Bank after the '67 war. So ideological religion, they were not that violent that days, like these lunatics today, but this is the hardcore. And I went with my dad on the West Bank hills and chant, "This is our land, this is our land," when I was 8 or 9. And yeah, for me it was, yeah, this is our land, and sooner or later it will be Israel. But after this whole army service that I was in, not for the right reason or for being anti-Zionist or anything, but I thought, spending so much time in the West Bank, I said, no, it will never be our land because there's too many, still I said Arabs here, not Palestinians. It's just not doable. And that was the first stage crack, I think, but far away from moving to the other side. But I disconnected myself from anything as I said, it's such a mess here. I don't want to think about it. I'll live my life. It's a very selfish thing to do. I'll live my life. I'll enjoy my life. I'll go skiing in France. I'll care for my family and friends. Whatever happened, I can't change it anyway. And yeah, so for Israel, it's not a compulsory to vote in elections. So for I think 15 years, I didn't vote. I've been very early, very late. I had still in the reserve army, I had a big injury in the Golan Heights, like a couple of years after that. And I think that was part of it, maybe too. And I remember just coming back from a trip to France and say, it was so fun, so good not to think about it. I'm coming back to Israel and I stopped reading any newspaper. I don't follow news anymore. So I can't remember, I hardly remember the second Intifada, which was way worse, even as Israeli than the first one. Bus exploding in the cities, and I remember the buses going, but I didn't think of who's right, who's wrong, or I didn't care. Just didn't care about the politics. I can't remember all the corrupted prime ministers in Israel. I can't remember that war in Lebanon in 2006. I remember, but I didn't think who's right, who's wrong again. So only when I came to Australia, I think first time in 2009, think about this. My daughters went to school, And I said, wow, they're in school with Indian and Hindus and Christians, and this is normal because in Israel there's Jewish school and Arab school. And then I thought there's also Jewish village, Jewish towns, and Arab town. It's not. There's mixture just in Haifa and Jaffa, and because historically that how we go, but still different neighborhoods. But in where I lived, there was no Arab. There you come to buy a house. What the hell are you doing? And then I thought, oh, what if Collingwood suburb will decide, no Jewish people here. This is a Christian suburb. So I thought, this is normal here. And long ago, I didn't know Australia is a racist country by then, because I'm racist. But I think this is normal. In that sense, it was way normal. Children in school together, and so that's another stage. And then I still didn't get into anything in politics. 5 years here, and only when I went back to Palestine, to Israel, in Palestine. 2014, I think I started to move, to learn the truth, being active for refugees. I was, sorry for the length. I was active for refugees, so at that time, heaps of refugees came from Africa to Israel, mainly from Sudan and Eritrea. And they were not Palestinians, but Israel said, no, it's a Jewish state. Whatever Holocaust you had in your country, peace off. Go back to Africa. So we tried to put them in Uganda. People that came from Eritrea moved to Uganda. They're not Ugandan, but they're all black people, so we didn't care. So this is the racism. This is the Jewish state. It's not about Palestine. It's about, this is Jewish state. I don't care what happened to you. So that's what the first activism. And then I learned, I taught myself, and I read all the books and moved towards. So there's no state that I was, afflict me, but that's what happened to me. And so I guess I needed this, I think, 15 years of emptiness just to get new ideas to come into my mind. Because once you are on this addiction to Zionism, whatever you've been told, logical, rational, factual, you're addicted. You can't see it. You just can't see it. And I'm trying it on my leftist friend in Israel. It just doesn't work. So it's a question I ask myself many times. What makes the circumstances of my life made me move to the position I'm today? It has nothing to do with it. It's not interesting, actually. The important thing is that I'm now doing what I have to do rather than.
Yep.
Yeah.
Another question, please. Lady over there.
Thank you all. This has been amazing. What can we do here in Australia? What's the most helpful thing we can do?
The question is why Palestine sometimes comes up in dinner discussions, maybe at work. Why Palestine? Why do we single out a Palestinian or a cause like the Palestinian cause and choose to support it? I mean, among non-Palestinians, among mainstream Australians. And I would say, of course, there are many other injustices in the world. Unfortunately, we have human rights violations in Africa and Asia, all around the world, and they are all worthy of support. But every era, there is a test there is a moral test. It used to be in the 60s and the 70s, it used to be Vietnam, and then it was South Africa. South Africa was the moral test of the world, where you cannot say, what is it to me in Australia? Why should I support the struggle of South Africans for equality in their own country? Of course, it is relevant to me in Australia in the 80s and 70s, because it is the moral test of our time. Palestine is the current moral test, or one of the most important moral tests of our time. Because even within the so-called progressive movement around the world, you will see people who have progressive views on climate change, who have progressive views on combating fascism, progressive views on combating Islamophobia and supporting indigenous rights and other minorities, but when it comes to Palestine, they are either silent or even worse, pro-Israel. And that is why there is a concept called Progressive Accept Palestine, PEP. So to challenge the so-called PEPs at work around us is one thing we can do. And to say, yes, it is relevant, and Palestine is the moral test. And also the protests every Sunday and every other in every capacity, even though that we feel helpless, we feel it is not changing the outcomes of the conflict, the genocide is still happening, and everything bad is still happening, but at least it will send a message to our own government that they cannot say Australia stands with Israel, because the street is not clearly standing with you who is standing with Israel. So what can be done is to continue the spirit and to continue challenging the PEPs and to educate more Australians about the Palestinian issue, about issues of human rights, and maybe Palestinian history and cultural literature and civil society. But also, I want you to know that whatever we do here has very big impact on us Palestinians. And I will end with a short story that my uncle told me, who is currently 82. He said that when I asked him in the context of collecting his story, and he said, Amo, what is the happiest day of your life? What is the saddest day of your life? And he said, I won't tell you the saddest day of his life, but I'll tell you the happiest day of his life. He said, I was in grade 3. We were in a refugee camp near Jericho. It is called Aqab al-Jabr camp for refugees. And the refugees in Aqab al-Jabr camp came from Jaffa, from Majdal, from Haifa, and from Jaffa. And we grew up there, and I kept hearing the stories of Palestine, the orchard, the green, the sea, but lived in another reality. And then in grade 4 came our principal and said, guys, today is a special day, we are going to take you on a tour. What happened was there was an American pro-Palestinian activist who came to the camp in 1954, and he said to the school manager, I want to take the kids on an excursion. And he paid for a bus, he paid for lunch, he paid for, and my uncle saw Palestine for the first time because of that non-Palestinian activist who came to the school and took the kids, and he saw where we are from in Majd al-Sadr, and he brought stories, and he said it was also the first time he would drink fizz drink, and he said, we drink Pepsi. He said Pepsi, we don't have a P. So I drink Pepsi for the first time, and that gave my uncle the happiest day of his life. So do not belittle what we do here in Australia. One of you has made one of us, gave him the happiest day of his life.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah, okay, thank you. I'll just like Yusuf and Nakshan both had a question. Does anybody have a question for Susan, please? Yep.
Yes, I'm sorry. Hi. I will ask my question to all because I can't think of a different question, but I would love to hear from Susan. As an activist, it's very clear to me and others like me that people march because they feel devastation and anger and hatred for the violence and for the devastation. And what is endlessly frustrating is knowing how many Jewish friends of mine, Israeli friends of mine, see the hatred for the violence as hatred for Jews. At the same time, from the activist movement, I see the intensity of the devastation at the violence means that they do not try to think, what could we do differently in this movement? How could we peace build? I am on side with everyone who marches on Sundays because it needs to be marched for. I'm getting to and it needs to be opposed. My question is to Nakhshan and Yusuf and Susan, do you feel from the inside that there's anything differently that the Free Palestine movement could be doing to help build peace? Seems an easy question.
You know, I think the rallies do help, but I think we shouldn't think that only one thing is going to make the whole difference. You know, I'm an accountant by trade, and as an accountant, they always tell us, you gotta look at the numbers from everywhere, and if you wanna save money, you gotta look at this expense line and this expense line and this expense line, and you steal or you reduce the costs, one expense line after another. And it's the same with the Free Palestine movement. It can't be only, we're going to only focus on rallies. It has to be lots of expense lines, or I mean lots of different activities to make the whole. So the aim is the freedom, and then you gotta list maybe, I don't know, maybe 10, 20 activities that the civil rights movement would be doing. We can't rely on one activity, and we can't rely on one person. Although, you know, like there's a power of the individual. There's lots of people who would do amazing things. Just one person does amazing things, because really even amazing things can be done in the mind of one person who would drive lots of people to do what's in that person's mind. And some of that stuff has happened for the good, and some of it has happened for the bad. But we as a movement across the world, we need to think about the various things that we need to do. Just to give an example, when we first started to even look at how we're going to help these refugees who have been coming, and to be honest, we only had $10,000 in the bank, you know, our organization. One of the things that we did was, I'm going to send an email to every single church in Australia. We didn't send the emails to the bishop. We sent it to every single priest in every single little village, in every single little town across Australia. And you know what they did? The priest picked up the phone and talked to the bishops. You know, there's a Palestinian Christian community that has come and nobody is supporting them. And so the little priests in little villages or little towns, just to give you an example, a Greek Orthodox a priest sent us $2,500 from one little town in South Australia. I never heard of this name. And also he sent us checks and letters of support. And he said, I sent a message to my bishop. We need to look at what the small things and the big things, and list all the expense lines, all the things that will make the whole, will free the Palestinians from this occupation. But we need to know what it is. We need the minds to come together to work that out, because right now what you are seeing is a disbandment of the world order. And we need to be aware of that. It's not, oh, you know, this is the Israelis versus the Palestinians. No, this is the change in the world order that has been run by the Anglo-American Empire, and right now it's being dismantled. And as a result, the United Nations will dismantle. So countries are going to basically do whatever they like. So we need to think as people in civil society, how can we hold it together when we see all the chaos in front of us, because it's going to get worse, not get better. Because right now we've got not even, people think, oh, this is right-wing leaders across the world. No, we've got crazy leaders across the world right now. We're going to make Gaza beautiful. We're just going to send those people in Gaza somewhere, going to build them nice houses. I mean, what crazy people are there running the world? So we all need to work out how, if these people can get to power, what else can we do? The educated people, we need to think about all the strategies to free the people, actually, not free just, it's not about Palestine, it's people being subjected to a brutal occupation. So whatever you can do, send letters, do other things, churches as well. We gotta get lots of people rally behind us.
Yusuf, would you like to say something?
More our hearts and minds and souls are torn apart, and only poetry and music and stories and dancing and satire can protect us. Like there is, I don't remember the name who said that, but he said that in the context of poetry, where he says, poetry heals the wounds inflicted by reason. So include poetry, include arts, which also drives me to my concert on the 27th. Come to my concert on the 27th. But also, finally, we have to approach the Palestinian advocacy from a holistic and panoramic point of view, not from a romanticized Australia-only, Melbourne-only point of view. And there is no better representation of that than Mahmoud Darwish, where he says at the closing of one of his poems to our homeland, where he says, I'll say it in Arabic, وبلادنا في ليلها الدموي وبلادنا في ليلها الدموي جوهرة تشع على البعيد وأما نحن داخلها فنزداد اختناقا. And our homeland is like a star that illuminates the universe, but for us inside that star, we suffocate more. So we have to acknowledge that for the Palestinian cause to be like a shining star, there are people who suffocate more and burn more for that star to keep illuminating. And you have to put everything in context and see it in a panoramic way. These are the 3 points I wanted to share. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very powerful closing, Yusuf. That's the end of our forum, except I'd like now May Safe to come up and close the forum on behalf of Free Palestine Melbourne.
Thank you. I'd like to take a moment to thank our panel discussion today and for our attendees. I do know that it is a hot and dreary Melbourne night, but I think it's really important to say that every one of you came out to hear Palestinian voices, but also to hear the people of Palestine. I think it's important to also recognise that Palestinian voices have been silenced for decades, that our cause, our stories, our suffering has been excluded from the public narrative. And it hasn't just been excluded, it's been othered, it has been attacked, delegitimised, and not even that, it's been made criminal. Palestinians know when they campaign for liberation that there is a risk and there is a price to pay. But we risk it anyway, because there is no other choice. When we look at Gaza and the devastation of that genocide that is continuing, it has never stopped. As Palestinians, we grew up with stories of our families, our grandparents. And listening to Sarah, it reminded me of my grandmother, who in 1948 experienced the first terrorist bombing that the Irgun orchestrated in Palestine. They blew up a building in Jaffa. In fact, they blew up a car that took down a building. And in that bombing, it killed 2 of my aunties. One was 6 months old and one was 2 years old. And it blinded my grandmother. And she experienced the Nakba, wounded with 2 other living children. Her husband was also assassinated. While he was looking for his family in the rubble, they shot him in the back of his head. And I grew up listening to her stories of Jaffa. So she never accepted that she was a refugee, as she lived in a refugee camp in Tulkaram, in Nur Shams, which is now being destroyed, and people are being made homeless again and made refugees again in their own country. She never acknowledged she was a refugee. She was a Palestinian, but this was her home. No matter what area of soil she stood, Palestine was her home. And in fact, in 1967, my father grew up in an orphanage due to poverty and lived through the 6-day war. And he saw his schoolmates being murdered by the Zionists, and they still remained. And in 1973, the Israeli soldiers came and rounded up members of the village into trucks and tried to ship them to the borders of Jordan so they can expel them. And my grandma snuck out with her 4 children and marched through the night and hid in buildings that were run down until she came back to her home because she refused to be expelled again. And this is generations and decades of Palestinian story and narrative, but it is real. It is a human lived experience. So when we look at Gaza and when we look at the West Bank right now, we know that it will only get worse. When Israel announced its ceasefire deal, which it could have done 12 months, 16 months earlier, we knew that it was hollow and it meant nothing. Because they've announced ceasefire deals for decades, and yet they still murder and massacre and pillage. And I think what we've learned from our speakers today, that doesn't happen by chance. Israel is a settler colonial state. Its very existence, its ideology is built on racism, ethno-supremacy, and the subjugation of the natives. In fact, Theodore Herzl himself, when he proposed his Zionist plan in Palestine, talked about the colonial mindset, that this was a colonial project to civilize the barbarians. So the founders of Zionism knew what they were creating. But as Palestinians, we also know what we are. We know that we are Muslim, Christian, Jewish, agnostic, nothing. We're an inclusive society. And what I like to tell some of the racists out there, I come from a family, my genealogy, my heritage, where I have family that are Muslim, Christian, and Jewish. That is being Palestinian. That is our story. And our story is a fight for human rights and equality. So Sarah and Yusuf are correct. Not only is Palestine the moral question of our time, it is more than that. It is a fight for equality for every single person. Because Palestine shows the worst of what humanity, colonialism, and empire can achieve. But it is up to us to fight back against it and force change. And yes, there is a way to do that. We have learnt those lessons throughout history. Us as humanity, as humans, have fought for liberation and justice. When we talk about human rights, it didn't just appear. The United Nations and the thought of liberty came out of some of the biggest horrors of our generations. The idea and terminology of what is genocide and apartheid came out of analysing what caused this and how do we stop it so it's never these crimes committed again. But now there is a challenge. There is a change in the New World Order, and barbarity, and I do use that term, where killing of innocent civilians is normalised. And that puts every single one of us at risk. So we do have a role to play. We have boycott, divestments and sanctions. Every single one of us can be involved, speaking to our local politicians, getting involved in campaign groups. Please join Free Palestine Melbourne. We all have a role to play. So thank you everyone for coming tonight. Thank you to our panel. Please give them a warm cheer and welcome for their time and for yours. Thank you.